not calling us a zoo, obviously, but when God first encounters our heart, of course, He knows our heart. But when He encounters us, it takes some training. And part of that training is doing difficult things that we don't always enjoy doing. And we find that those are troubles and trials in our life. But He never meant for us to do that alone. God sent each and every one of us to be there, to be an Aaron and to be a Hur. For when that person is struggling, holding their arms up, when that person in the midst of their battle, in the midst of their faith, is having difficulty, He sends people to be there for them. To be His representatives. Because that's exactly what they are. You notice these people weren't just strange people. These were people that Moses knew. These are people that God trusted that would be able to do that. And so when God sends you support, He will send people that can support you. And so what that means for you and I is that if you find yourself in crisis, if you find yourself in the middle of a trial, if you're ill, and I know if you're like me, I tend to be a little guarded. I tend not to be real public about everything going on. And if you're like me, that's hard to do, is to ask for help. It's hard to tell somebody else about your struggle. But God wants you to share that burden. And then the next thing that we want to talk about real quick before I'll tie us back to our sermon title here in a second. And this is one that a few weeks ago, it might be a month ago now, in a sermon I mentioned that there's some things that was never said in the Bible, and one of those things is that God only helps those that help themselves. And that's true. God never said that's not in the Bible. That was quoted to Ben Franklin. But there is a verse in the Bible that we have to consider. And that is a verse that God doesn't excuse us for not carrying our own weight. And we find it here in Galatians 6 and 5. It says, for each person will have to carry his own load. And so the idea that we help others carry their load, when it's a crushing load, is something that the church, it's kind of our business. That's what we do. We're there for one another. In the ministry level, they call it pastoral care, but we just call it loving on people. That's what that is. But when people are expected to carry their own load, this is a little different idea. This goes back to the idea of going camping. If you were in the military, this is something I've talked to people about, and of course they're more familiar with it than I am, but I would imagine if a soldier was carrying a pack and they were fully capable of carrying that pack and they were out in the field and they just didn't want to carry it any further, I'd imagine that would not go so well, would it, Danny? No, it would not, right? Because it messes with the entire team. It messes with the unit when you have to start packing other people's weight. When they're capable. It's different if they're not. That's moving into maybe crisis mode. But if they're capable of carrying their own weight, it's a little different story. And that's why the Bible, when it talks about carrying a load here, it uses a different word than burden. When it says to carry a load, the word actually refers to a soldier's pack here. So when Paul was telling them in the book of Galatians, hey, listen, you are to help others. You're to be there for them because you fulfill the law of Christ when you do this. But you also have to carry